Echoes of Silence, A Mother's 40-Year Search. Chapter 1, The Weight of Absence. A fine layer of dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through the tall windows of Eleanor Vance's historic Charleston home. 75 years had etched lines of wisdom and sorrow around her eyes, turning them into a deeper, more reflective blue. But today, a new kind of weariness, profound and pervasive, settled deep in her bones. Her husband, Richard, had passed away 6 months ago, leaving behind a silence so vast it seemed to echo through every room, every forgotten corner, every unread book in his study. Now came the daunting task of sorting through a lifetime of accumulated memories, of objects that whispered stories only Richard could truly tell, and some, perhaps, that even he had kept silent. She sat amidst boxes in the attic, the air thick with the scent of aged paper, mothballs, and dreams that had long since withered. Richard had been a man of meticulous routines, of impeccable order, a man who believed every item had its place. But even he, it seemed, had a hidden corner or two, a secret stash of his own, tucked away from the meticulous eye of daily life. This particular box Eleanor had never seen before. It was smaller than the others, made of dark, polished mahogany, its surface smooth under her fingertips. It was surprisingly heavy, as if it held the weight of untold stories, of decades of unspoken words that carried the weight of her grief, a sound that seemed to disturb the very dust in the air. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among layers of tissue paper that had long since surrendered their crispness to the relentless march of time, was a parcel. It was neatly wrapped, tied with thin, brittle twine that snapped with a gentle tug. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. R. Vance, written in a delicate, almost old-fashioned looping hand with an unfamiliar French stamp and a postmark clearly dated from 40 years ago. The return address, equally elegant, read Isabelle Dubois, Normandy, France. Isabelle Dubois. The name struck Eleanor like a tuning fork, resonating with a long-buried ache, a phantom limb of her heart. Isabelle had been their son Sam's nanny. Briefly, so many decades ago, Eleanor remembered her vividly, even after all this time, the way memory sometimes clings to the periphery of pain. Her luminous dark eyes, her shy, almost hesitant smile, the soft, melodious way she would hum French lullabies to a then-toddler Sam. Isabelle, fresh out of some finishing school in Paris, had seemed a quiet, artistic young woman, almost ethereal in her presence. She'd stayed for just a year, a fleeting, bright presence in their lives. Then, she had left abruptly, giving only a vague excuse about a family emergency back home, an ailing aunt, Eleanor vaguely recalled. A month later, the world as Eleanor knew it had fractured. Sam, then 17, a boy full of restless energy and burgeoning dreams, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note on his bed that offered no solace, only more questions, more agonizing uncertainty. "I need to find my truth," it had read. Nothing more. A single torn page from a school notebook, hastily scrawled. The police had searched, endlessly it seemed. Charleston, with its labyrinthine alleys and sprawling marshes, had offered countless places for a boy to disappear. They had combed the low country, circulated flyers with Sam's smiling, youthful face, his shock of dark hair, his earnest eyes. But he was simply gone. 40 years of unanswered questions, of a mother's heart held captive by an unbearable void, a void that had widened, deepened with Richard's passing, leaving Eleanor utterly alone with her grief, with the ghost of a son she could never truly bury. Every birthday, every holiday, every passing season brought with it a fresh wave of that specific, insidious pain, the absence of the unknown. Now this parcel, from Isabel. After all this time, with trembling fingers, Eleanor untied the twine, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the attic. Inside, wrapped in faded silk that crumbled slightly at her touch, was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age, the leather worn smooth in places, as if it had been held often, cherished. Written in a flowing, elegant hand, it was entirely in French. Eleanor's French was rudimentary at best, a few phrases picked up from old films, some grammar from childhood lessons that had long since evaporated. This was beyond her. She couldn't decipher more than a few scattered words. A jolt of something akin to fear, sharp and cold, ran through her. Why had this parcel been hidden? Why had Richard never mentioned it? A new layer of mystery, of possible deception, of untold stories, settled over her already heavy heart. What secrets had Richard kept? And why? She clutched the diary, its forgotten weight a tangible link to a past she thought she understood, a past that now felt like a fragile, crumbling edifice. Chapter 2: The Digital Archaeologist. A week later, Eleanor found herself across a polished oak desk from Lydia Hayes, a young woman with a bright, inquisitive gaze and a practical ponytail, a stark contrast to the old-world charm of Eleanor's home. Lydia, barely 28, ran a small but highly regarded business specializing in genealogical research and digital archiving, a skill set Eleanor hadn't even known existed until her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who prided herself on being perpetually in the know, had enthusiastically recommended her. "She finds things, Eleanor," Mrs. Henderson had declared, her eyes wide with conviction. "Things no one else can. She's like a digital archaeologist." Lydia's office was surprisingly modern, tucked away in a renovated, historic building downtown. It was a space filled with the quiet hum of computers, the soft glow of multiple screens, and shelves overflowing with antique books, a perfect bridge between two worlds. Eleanor laid the diary carefully on the desk, its aged presence, its faded leather and yellowed pages, stark against the sleek, contemporary technology. "It's fascinating, Mrs. Vance," Lydia said, her fingers hovering expertly over a digital image of a diary page captured with a specialized scanner that magnified every ink stroke. "The script is beautiful, truly a work of art in itself. And the paper? It's clearly from the late 70s, precisely as you said. The watermark confirms it." Eleanor, still feeling a tremor of nerves, explained the connection to Isabel, to Sam. She recounted the agonizing story of Sam's disappearance, the 40 years of silent torment, the hope that had slowly calcified into a dull ache. She spoke of the unanswered questions, the endless what-ifs that had haunted her dreams. Lydia listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration, her gaze unwavering, her presence radiating a quiet competence. She didn't offer empty platitudes or sympathetic sighs, only a quiet, understanding professionalism that Eleanor found surprisingly comforting. "I can certainly help you with the translation," Lydia offered. her voice calm and professional, cutting through Eleanor's anxieties. My French is fluent, and I have specialized software that can help with historical nuances in the language, specific regionalisms that might be present. And if Miss Dubois is still alive, and if she wants to be found, I can absolutely attempt to trace her. My tools are quite effective for that. We can cross-reference old records, census data, even social media from that region if she has a digital footprint. The translation began slowly, painstakingly. Lydia would send Eleanor transcribed and translated pages daily. Little fragments of Isabel's life unfolding through emails. It was like receiving a series of time capsule letters, each one a precious, sometimes painful, window into a past both familiar and strangely alien. The diary was not a dramatic tell-all or a breathless confession. It was a deeply personal, often introspective journal, detailing Isabel's day-to-day experiences in Charleston. It spoke of the oppressive heat of the southern summer, the intoxicating fragrance of magnolias blooming in the humid air, the gentle rhythm of life in the Low Country that was so different from her native France. It also contained Isabel's astute observations of the Vance household, of Eleanor's quiet grace, of Richard's distant kindness, his preoccupation with his work, and always, woven through the mundane details of daily life, were entries about Sam. August 14th, 1978. Samuel is a truly remarkable child, so curious, so gentle, so eager to learn. He asked me today about the stars, how far they are, if they are little holes in the sky for the light to shine through. His mind is like a canvas, eager for color, for understanding, for the vastness of the universe. He makes me feel less alone. October 3rd, 1978. Mrs. Vance had a headache today, a terrible one. Samuel, without prompting, drew her a picture of a smiling sun, radiating warmth, hoping to chase away the darkness. He is all light, a pure, innocent light in this often shadowed world, Eleanor read, tears blurring the words on her screen, smudging the carefully translated sentences. It was like seeing her son again, not through her own memories, which were often tinged with the grief of his absence, but through someone else's loving, appreciative eyes. It was a comfort, a gentle balm to her wounded spirit, a way to reclaim fragments of her lost boy. But with the comfort came a growing unease, subtle discord in the harmony of the words. Isabel's entries about Sam were intensely personal, fiercely protective, bordering on maternally possessive. More so than a nanny's, perhaps. She wrote about his moods, his tiny triumphs, his unspoken fears, his dreams, with an intimacy that felt almost proprietary, almost as if she were a mother herself. Eleanor tried to dismiss it as overthinking, a grieving mother grasping at straws, projecting her own longing onto Isabel's deeply felt words. But the feeling persisted, a faint, disquieting whisper in the back of her mind. As weeks turned into a month, the diary approached the crucial year of Sam's disappearance. The entries grew more fragmented, less focused on daily events, more on internal turmoil. Isabel wrote less about her day, more about anxieties, about a secret that weighed on her, a burden she struggled to carry alone, a truth that tormented her waking hours and haunted her sleep. March 12th, 1979. The truth presses on me like the Carolina humidity, heavy and suffocating. How can I carry this burden alone without breaking? My heart aches with it, a constant dull throb, He deserves to know. But at what cost? What would become of him? Of them? Of me? April 5th, 1979. I saw them today in the market, by the fish stall. The resemblance, it is undeniable, heartbreaking in its clarity. My heart aches for a choice I made, a life I could not give, a truth I cannot speak, a past that insists on haunting my present. Eleanor reread the lines again and again, her fingers tracing the translated words on the screen, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. What truth? What choice? Who had Isabel seen at the market? The questions swirled, coalescing into a single, terrifying premonition that Eleanor tried desperately to push away, but which, like a persistent phantom, refused to dissipate. Chapter 3, The Fracture. Then the entry from May 10th, 1979. The day Sam vanished. The day her world had fractured into a million irreparable pieces. Eleanor remembered every agonizing second of that day. The empty bed, the hastily scribbled note, the growing panic, the frantic calls to police, the endless, agonizing wait. May 10th, 1979. He knows. He knows. My beautiful boy. The world is too small for secrets this vast, for hearts this broken, for the weight of a past that refuses to stay buried. He is gone to find what was lost. I pray he finds peace. I pray he finds me. The next page was blank. The diary ended abruptly, a cruel punctuation mark on decades of unanswered questions, a final, chilling whisper into the void. Eleanor stared at the final, haunting entry, the words blurring before her eyes, coalescing into a single, terrifying understanding. He knows. He is gone to find what was lost. I pray he finds me. What had Sam known? What had he gone to find? A tremor ran through her, an icy premonition that something far more complex, far more painful than a simple runaway tale, was about to be revealed. The notion that Isabel might have known something about Sam's departure, something significant, had been a distant, uncomfortable thought. Now it was a searing, undeniable certainty. The phone rang, startling her, pulling her violently back to the present. It was Lydia, her voice tentative, a little breathless, as if she too had been touched by the shadows of the past. Mrs. Vance. Lydia's voice came through the line. I found something remarkable. It was tucked into the binding of the very last page, almost invisible, like it was meant to be a final, desperate message. Eleanor rushed to Lydia's office, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fierce, desperate hope. The journey felt interminable, the short drive a lifetime. When she arrived, Lydia was already there, holding a small, yellowed Polaroid in gloved hands. She carefully slid it from a protective sleeve, presenting it to Eleanor as if it were a delicate, priceless artifact. It was faded, but the image was clear enough to send a jolt of pure shock through Eleanor's entire being. In it, a teenage Sam stood, his arm loosely around Isabel. He was smiling, a rare, wistful smile that Eleanor hadn't seen in years, a smile that spoke of both affection and a newfound understanding, a maturity that had bypassed his young age. But the most jarring, soul-shattering detail was the object Isabel held in her arms. It was a baby, a newborn, wrapped in a crocheted blanket, its tiny head peeking out, eyes barely open. The baby had a shock of dark hair, just like Sam's had been when he was an infant. But the most uncanny, undeniable detail was the child's eyes, Even in the grainy photo, they seemed uncannily like Sam's, deep, dark, and intelligent, carrying a hint of the same intensity. And the woman holding the baby, cradling it with such tender possessiveness, was undeniably Isabel. Eleanor stared, her breath catching in her throat, the air suddenly thin and cold, as if all oxygen had been sucked from the room. The baby looked nothing like her. Not a single feature, not a hint of Eleanor's ancestry. Lydia's voice was gentle, almost a whisper, as if she feared breaking the fragile moment. I cross-referenced the dates, Mrs. Vance. This photo appears to have been taken just before Isabel left Charleston. Her entries, they speak of a choice, a secret, my beautiful boy. And the resemblance between the baby and Sam, it's striking. More than striking, it's uncanny. Lydia paused, her gaze filled with profound compassion, a silent acknowledgement of the earthquake that had just struck Eleanor's world. I think Sam wasn't your biological son. I think he was Isabel's. I think he was the baby in that picture. The words hung in the air, shattering the silence of the room, shattering Eleanor's world into a million glittering shards of fractured truth. 40 years of agony, of questions, of a truth she had blindly accepted, lived by, and mourned within. And now this. A cold, hard truth, replacing the agonizing void. The pieces of Isabel's diary, the cryptic entries, the intense affection for Sam, the sudden departure, all clicked into place, forming a narrative Eleanor never could have imagined in her wildest, most terrifying dreams. A family constructed on a foundation of unspoken secrets, a life built on a whispered lie, a love born of deception. But why? Eleanor whispered, tears finally escaping, hot and stinging on her cheeks, blurring her vision. Why would she leave him? Why would she never tell us? Why would Richard keep this from me? All these years, why? Her voice broke on her husband's name, the pain of his deception, his ultimate betrayal, cutting deeper than any other wound. A fresh betrayal from the grave. Lydia reached across the desk, placing a comforting hand on Eleanor's trembling one, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos. I think, she said softly, her voice filled with empathy. The diary hints at a desperate situation. She mentioned persecution in an earlier, almost illegible entry, written in a cramped, hurried hand, almost as if she feared being discovered. Perhaps something political in France at the time, or a profound personal hardship she couldn't overcome. Being an unmarried mother in rural France at that time, especially from a poor family, it would have been incredibly difficult, leading to social ostracization, poverty, a life of endless struggle. And perhaps Richard, perhaps he thought he was protecting you from pain, from the truth of a stillborn child, by bringing Sam into your life this way. Perhaps he believed it was an act of love, however misguided. Lydia then added, her voice gaining a professional certainty. I went ahead and used my resources, Mrs. Vance. While the photo suggests a connection and the diary is compelling, I needed concrete proof. I cross-referenced old French birth records, immigration documents, even some old Social Security files from the period she was here. It took some doing, but I found her. Isabelle Dubois. She's alive, living in a small village in Brittany, not Normandy as the old address implied, a slight historical misattribution perhaps, but the correct village now. Riec-sur-Boulogne. I have her address, even a phone number. The world tilted on its axis, then righted itself. But it was a new world now, Isabel was alive, and Sam was somewhere. The knowledge, even without full understanding, filled Eleanor with a raw, undeniable hope that had been dormant, a sleeping giant, for 40 years. It was a hope that tasted of both joy and bitter sorrow, of reunion and profound loss. Chapter 4. The Confession. Across the miles. The phone call with Isabelle Dubois was perhaps the hardest conversation Eleanor had ever initiated. It was difficult, punctuated by long, agonizing silences, the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, a silent, echoing witness between two women whose lives were inextricably bound by a secret, a profound, life-altering truth. Eleanor had called from Lydia's office. Lydia sitting beside her, a steadying presence. Isabel's voice, when she spoke, was reedy and fragile with age, heavily accented, but her words, though broken by emotion, were clear enough to deliver the final, shocking truth. She had started crying almost immediately, recognizing Eleanor's name, whispering apologies even before the questions were fully formed. She had been a very young, naive, and ultimately desperate woman from a poor rural family in Brittany. She had given birth to a son, Samuel, out of wedlock, a devastating shame in her traditional community. She had been sent away, first to Paris, then to America, under the guise of an au pair position, to escape the social ostracization and the bleak future that awaited her and her child. Her family, desperate for her to escape the stigma and make a better life, had arranged for her to come to America. Richard Vance, a distant relative of a friend of her family, had recently suffered an unimaginable tragedy. He and Eleanor had suffered a devastating stillbirth, losing their much-longed-for son just days before Isabel's arrival. He was a man consumed by grief, desperate for a child, a son to fill the aching void in his marriage, a void he feared would break Eleanor. Isabel, facing destitution, unable to care for her baby, and overwhelmed by the perceived opportunity for her son, had made an impossible choice. She had agreed to give her son, Samuel, to the Vances. Richard had privately made a clandestine deal with Isabel's family. Isabel would leave the baby with them, and they would adopt him as their own. Isabel, heartbroken and desperate, had believed it was the only way her son would have a chance at a good life, a future she could never provide from her impoverished circumstances. She had stayed for a year, growing to love the Vances, Eleanor with her quiet strength, Richard with his desperate kindness, and the life they offered her son. But the secret, the immense weight of her sacrifice, festered within her, a constant, nagging wound. She lived each day torn between the love for her son, whom she saw every day, and the agonizing silence of her secret. Richard had never told Eleanor the truth. He'd explained Isabel's sudden departure as a family emergency back home, a convenient lie. He'd told Eleanor that Sam was adopted through a private, closed agency, a legal fiction designed to protect them both from the painful, unconventional truth of their arrangement, from the raw grief of their loss. He had loved Eleanor deeply and had wanted to spare her the pain of a barren womb, the unending grief of a lost child, by bringing Sam into her life as seamlessly as possible, a perfect, precious gift. "I tried to tell him, Mrs. Vance," Isabel whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears, her pain palpable, even across the vast distance. "I wrote it in the diary. I put the photo, hoping it would be clear. I begged him to tell you the truth. For Sam's sake, for yours, I sent the parcel, hoping it would make him finally speak, hoping it would be a catalyst for confession. She paused, a fresh wave of sobs escaping her lips. But he never did he? And the parcel, it never arrived. I waited, agonizing for a response, a call, an accusation. When nothing came, when there was only silence, I assumed the Vances had received it, understood, and simply wanted nothing more to do with me, the deceiver. I was consumed by guilt, by the fear that I had ruined your lives, that I had been an unforgivable deceit. I retreated into my life in reexorbelin, my secret consuming me, a constant shadow. Eleanor confirmed it had only just been found, explaining the strange circumstances of its discovery. Isabel, in turn, explained that she had lived with the constant gnawing regret, the fear of being exposed, the guilt of her actions. She had imagined Eleanor's fury, Richard's disappointment. She had built a new life, quietly, simply, but never truly free from the burden of her past. Sam, he found me, Isabel choked out, her voice now thick with a different kind of emotion, a profound, fragile joy. He came to Rex-sur-Bellon 40 years ago, after he read my last entries in the diary. He must have recognized the village name, put the clues together from his own fragmented memories, the little things I'd told him as a child. He was angry at first, so angry, at me, at Richard, at the world for keeping such a monumental secret from him. But then he understood. She paused, taking a shaky breath. He understood why I did it. He understood I loved him, that I wanted the best for him, that I had acted out of desperation, not malice. He stayed. He lives here. He has a family, a beautiful wife, 2 wonderful children. He is happy, Eleanor, truly happy. Eleanor felt a wave of dizzying relief, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. Sam was alive. Her son, her missing boy, was alive. The tears that flowed now were not of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, joyous release. 40 years of a mother's torment, lifted in a single, painful, yet ultimately redemptive phone call. The truth was painful, yes, built on a foundation of deception and sorrow. But it was a truth she could finally live with, a truth that paradoxically brought peace to her ravaged heart. He told me he loved you very much, Eleanor, Isabel continued, her voice softer now, almost a balm to Eleanor's wounded spirit. He said you were his mother, always. You raised him. You taught him kindness, strength, resilience. You gave him a life. He never forgot that. He never forgot you. He just needed to know his truth. Chapter 5, The Reunion. A week later, Eleanor Vance, accompanied by Lydia, who had become more than just an assistant, but a quiet, compassionate confidant and friend, found herself on a plane to France. The journey was long, stretched across time zones and oceans, but every minute was filled with an unbearable anticipation, a fluttering hope that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The long hours in the air, crossing continents, felt like a bridge spanning 40 years of separation. She thought of Sam, of the boy she'd raised, of the man she was about to meet. She thought of Richard, of his secrets, and found herself, surprisingly, feeling not only anger, but a melancholic understanding of his desperate love. When she finally stepped onto French soil, into the crisp, cool air of a spring morning, into the small, charming village Isabel described, Riec-sur-Bellone, a coastal gem in Brittany. Nestled among rolling hills and ancient stone houses, she felt a tremor of nerves, followed by a surge of overwhelming hope that pushed aside every other emotion. Isabel had given them precise directions to the village square, a bustling heart of local life, vibrant with the chatter of market vendors and the scent of fresh bread and seafood. Eleanor's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face she knew, a face she only recognized from a faded photograph, a youthful memory. Then she saw him first across the square, amidst the vibrant chaos of the market, by a stall piled high with fresh oysters. A man with kind eyes and a shock of dark hair, now streaked with silver, catching the morning light. He wasn't a boy anymore. Not the 17-year-old she'd last seen, frozen in time in her memories. This was a man, mature, weathered by life, with a quiet strength in his bearing. But he was undeniably Sam. His smile, though etched with the passage of time, full of strength, still held the familiar curve she remembered, the same slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when he was truly amused. He looked just like the boy she'd raised, mixed with hints of Isabel's delicate features, a harmonious, beautiful blend of two lives. He saw her, and a slow, uncertain smile spread across his face, followed by a flicker of disbelief that mirrored her own. Then recognition dawned in his eyes, bright and clear, radiating a warmth that reached across the distance. He was walking towards her, his pace quickening with every step, the crowd parting around him as if by magic. "Mother?" he asked, his voice deeper, matured by years and experience, but still holding the familiar cadence she remembered, a melody from a long-lost song that had suddenly, miraculously returned. Eleanor didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was tight with emotion, her eyes overflowing. She simply reached out, her arms trembling, and he enveloped her in a hug that was 40 years in the making. It was a hug of forgiveness, of reunion, of an unbreakable bond that transcended blood and time, transcended secrets and pain, transcended the long, echoing silence. It was a hug that held the echoes of silence and the promise of a future finally reunited, a future where they could finally begin to heal. Later, sitting in Isabel's cozy farmhouse kitchen, the air filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread and simmering herbs, sunlight streaming through a window overlooking a garden bursting with spring blooms, Eleanor met her grandchildren. 2 bright-eyed teenagers, a girl named Sophie, with Isabel's dark, luminous eyes, and a boy named Louis, with Sam's restless curiosity. They spoke fluent French and surprisingly good English, a testament to their father's roots and a bridge across cultures. They were curious, a little shy, but their eyes held a warmth, a genuine curiosity that spoke volumes of their upbringing. She learned about Sam's life, his work as a skilled carpenter and craftsman, shaping wood with hands that mirrored his father Richard's. She heard about his quiet contentment in this beautiful remote corner of the world, building a life filled with love and purpose. She saw the quiet pride in Isabel's eyes as she spoke of her son, a pride that Eleanor now shared, unburdened by the weight of a painful past, seeing only the thriving man Sam had become. Eleanor looked at Isabel, a woman she had once only vaguely remembered, then unknowingly resented for taking her son, and now saw only another mother who had made an impossible choice out of love and desperation. A woman who had carried her own burden of silence, her own profound pain for decades. They were two mothers, connected by one extraordinary son, finally sharing a common ground of understanding and forgiveness. The love Eleanor felt for Sam hadn't diminished, even with the knowledge of his true parentage. If anything, it had deepened, broadened, expanded to encompass not just the boy she'd raised, but the man he had become, and the biological mother who had given him life. The diary, once a source of agonizing mystery, a symbol of Richard's deception, had become a bridge, connecting fragmented lives, weaving a new tapestry of family, forgiveness, and enduring love. Eleanor had lost a secret, a foundational truth of her life. But in doing so, she had found her son, and in finding him, had found a peace she never thought possible. Her journey, sparked by a dusty, unopened parcel, had led her not to the answer she expected, but to a profound, transformative truth that love is not always defined by blood, but by the hands that raise, the heart that cares, and the bond that endures, even across 4 decades of silence, across oceans and continents. Eleanor, Sam, and Isabel, once strangers bound by a hidden truth, were now a family, not perfect, but whole, finally ready to embrace a future where echoes of silence gave way to the harmonious melodies of shared stories, rediscovered love, and the boundless healing power of forgiveness. The silence was broken, and life, in all its complicated, beautiful truth, could finally begin anew.